Hi, my name's Noel Greco. I'm a registered nurse and I work as a wellbeing advisor here at Newcastle University.
Hi, my name's Georgie Kerr and I'm also a wellbeing advisor at the university and I'm an occupational therapist.
Thanks for joining us in this webinar on getting the most out of your brain in exams. This is something I'm really passionate about, because I think I really struggled with this when I was doing my undergrad. So I'll share what I know and Georgie will share what she knows and we'll get through this together.
So today we're going to start off by talking a little bit about probably one of the main reasons that everybody's here, which is stress. And of course everybody experiences stress leading up to exams, and so we're going to talk a little bit about what stress is and what contributes to stress, and we're also just going to go through some really practical tips and strategies that you can really use leading up to an exam, during an exam, and also after an exam.
Okay, cool. Let's get into it. So Georgie spoke about stress, and I just like to change the idea of stress. I'd like to change your relationship with stress. So stress is not always a bad thing. Actually, stress is a good thing. We need a little bit of stress in our lives to get moving, to get motivated. And there's actually a relationship between stress and motivation. Yeah. So in the graph that you're seeing right now, where there's performance on the vertical axis and the stress levels on the horizontal axis. If you didn't have enough stress in your life, with your study, maybe with the sport that you're doing, you're actually not going to perform your best. So imagine yourself as an Olympic athlete and you've made it to the 2021 Olympic Games and you're there in the 200-meter dash and you're at the starting line and all your families are watching you and everything's being videoed. If you didn't have enough stress, if you didn't have enough adrenaline flowing through your body, you're not going to run the fastest time. Yeah, if you say to yourself, "This is just another race, you'll be right." I don't think you'll do that well in that race. On the other hand, if you had too much stress, if you had too much cortisol, if you had too much adrenaline running through your body, if you're too preoccupied with my family up in the bleachers and my Nike deal when I finish this race, if you had too much stress, you're actually not going to run your fastest time either. You're going to be overwhelmed, your attention's going to be fractured. So we actually need the perfect balance of stress, what we call the peak performance range. Not too much stress, not too little stress. Yeah.
I was talking to Noelle before about when I would sit exams in uni, I would feel really, really, really nervous. But I was able to use that nervous energy and that adrenaline to sort of get me through an exam, because like you all know, sometimes exams go for 2 hours and you can run out of energy pretty quickly. But that nervous energy I was able to use to get me through the exam and sort of convert it into sort of brain power, which I guess is what we're talking about today.
Yeah, cool. I like that. Like the little reframing there. Yeah. Am I stressed or am I alive? Yeah. Mm-hmm. So let's break down this experience of stress. So there's a situation. Yeah. So imagine that you're studying for an exam and the exam's about 2 weeks away. And in that situation, there's all these different factors. There's the feeling that you have. So maybe you feel confident, maybe you feel stressed, maybe you feel okay. There are the thoughts that you have. I'm going to fail this exam, or this exam's going to be easy. Maybe you have the behavior. Maybe you're studying right now. Maybe you're procrastinating a little bit. And you have what's called physiology. A fancy word to say what's happening inside your body. So maybe you feel...
For me, I would always feel like a racing heartbeat, or I might feel like sweaty in the palms, or I might notice that I'm not breathing as deeply. I'm sort of breathing just inside, in sort of at the chest level. And that would be sort of my signs of how I would notice that I was stressed or nervous.
So it's really, really important to know what stress looks like for you. Yeah, and how it shows up for you. For example, for me, stress for me, I actually get really tired, I get really fatigued, I think I need to sleep, and my memory is not that great. So that's, maybe not a normal way to experience stress, but now knowing myself, I know that's what happens when I'm stressed, and to kind of work through that so I can study. Yeah.
I think, like, if you think about an example of the feelings that you might get when you're stressed, I don't know if anybody's noticed, but leading up to the exams, you might start to be a little bit shorter with the people around you. So you might sort of be a little bit more irritable, a little bit more frustrated because there is that underlying stress going on. So those might be an example of the feelings that you might experience, like if you are experiencing stress.
So have a look at this table that we've got, because sometimes stress is like the wind. You can't see the wind, but you can see what it moves, the leaves and the trees. And some people are really aware of, their stress levels, and some people aren't. And so you have to kind of look for the signs around you, around your physiology, what's happening inside your body, around your behavior, maybe your thoughts. So you can see if your stress is a bit low, and you need to kind of bring up the motivation and the focus, or if your stress is a bit high and you need to kind of, just tweak it and bring it down to your peak performance level again. Yeah. So, Georgie, how to get the most out of your brain? Should we start?
Yeah, let's get into it.
Cool.
So we're going to start off by talking about some really practical strategies that you can use leading up to exams. So the first one that we want to talk about is just something you can do before you even start to study, and that's to think about how do you best learn. So there's sort of this model that you can use, which has got the 4 common learning styles that people may have. So they are, as you can see on the slide, people could be visual learners, auditory learners, they might learn best by reading and writing, or they might be kinesthetic learners, which is, again, a fancy word for saying they learn by doing things. And I know Noelle and myself are quite different in the way that we learn, so I'm very much a visual learner. And when I was studying, I would do things like making mind maps, and so that when I got into the exam, when I was trying to picture the answer, I would basically picture my mind map and figure out where on that mind map the answer to the question was. But I know for you learn.
Yeah, I'm definitely an auditory learner, so I would listen to lectures over and over again. I would listen to YouTube explanations. I would also, part of auditory learning is I would try to teach it to somebody else. And it really didn't matter if they understood it or not, but if I had a flow and if I can teach it clearly, I knew that I had the concept. Yeah. I was a little bit of a kinesthetic learner, so I would walk or jog when I was listening to my lecturers. And definitely I would move around. I would, because I did nursing, I did a lot of biology, I would tap a part of my body that I was studying, if I was doing, the muscles of my body or nerves and things like that. Yeah. Georgie, any other tips for the people that are, kind of a reader or a writer?
I think often people who are reader-writer like to, write a lot of notes from their lectures, and they might study by reading over their notes. I was a little bit of a reader-writer learner as well, so what I would do is I downloaded a cue card app, and I would write multiple cue cards about the questions that I wanted to answer for the exams. But it wasn't so much the actual asking and kind of responding to the cue cards as it was actually writing out the cue cards. That was my way of learning the content. So that's just one example, but I think it's a really good place to start, just to figure out how you best learn. And there's no right or wrong way. And also sometimes you might just want to mix it up. So if you're getting bored of your study, sometimes changing the modality of how you're studying is a good way to keep up motivation. You might be sitting there and thinking, I don't really know how I best learn. I don't know if I'm visual. I don't know if I'm auditory. If you have a look up the VAK questionnaire on Google, there's a link there as well on the slide. You can just do a quick quiz and it'll ask you questions like, if you were assembling furniture, would you read the instructions, or would you throw out the instructions and just try and build it yourself? And those type of questions, which gives you at the end a bit of an idea of what type of learner you are. So that's a really good place to start.
Yeah, I think it's a really good idea to know yourself, because we change from a child learner to an adult learner. So let's study smart instead of studying hard. Yeah. So
a couple of other things just to think about before you even start to study is, I guess, first off about the environment that you're studying in. So there's a couple of different factors you might want to think about it. So it might be, do you study best alone? Do you study best in a group? Do you actually like to sometimes study in a group but also like to do a little bit by yourself? Where are you studying? Are you studying in your room at home? Is it really messy? Are you getting distracted by everything in your environment? Is it easier for you to study at university? Is it easier for you to study in a cafe and actually make studying not feel as much like a chore, but actually something nice that you like to do? And then the other thing you might want to think about is the time of day you're studying. So there's no right or wrong time. Some people are morning people, some people are evening people. Our brains all work in different ways, and so if it's better for you to study in the morning, then definitely schedule your time for study in the morning and your time for play in the evening. And just really having a think about this stuff before you even start to get prepared for the exams is really good, because often I think leading up to exams we're really worried about time, and we're always having these thoughts of, I don't have enough time to get all this done. So we kind of skip past the actual preparation for study phase, and then our study isn't as efficient and it's not as good quality study as it could be if we actually just prioritize spending a little bit of time figuring out how we're going to study.
Yeah. And I think as a little tip, if when you are studying, at least a few times, try to study in the environment that you'll be doing your exams. So for example, if I've got like a practical exam, like an OSCEs or, something that I have to assemble, maybe studying, just visualizing it, imagining it all the time isn't the great thing. Maybe sometimes I actually have to get into lab and actually do it. And also, if I always study at night, by myself, maybe studying in the library once or twice with kind of a timer to kind of simulate that exam environment might be helpful for my stress, just to kind of acclimatize me. Yeah, that's a really good idea.
So a couple of other things to think about leading into an exam. Often, like I said, when we don't have time, we haven't planned out our study. What we'll do is we'll sit down and our goal for the day will be, I'm going to study. And it might be a little bit more specific, so it might be like, I'm going to study anatomy today, or I'm going to study geography, or whatever the topic is. But the issue with setting those sort of vague goals for study is they don't have any specific endpoint. And you also don't get any sort of sense of achievement from setting those sort of vague goals. So basically what happens is you'll sit down, you say, I'm going to study anatomy, and to figure out the end point of that is based on your feelings. So I don't feel like doing this anymore is sort of the end point of the study. And often we don't feel like studying, so that could be a lot earlier than we want it to be. So I think a really good strategy is being as specific as you can and breaking down your study into really specific goals. So the first thing I've got on the slide there is setting reasonable expectations. So we know that in a student life, like, study isn't the only thing that's going on for you. So you might have children, you might have sporting things going on, you might have
social life.
A social life, yeah, hopefully.
Or social commitments.
Yeah. Which needs to go into your study plan, because also those are the type of things that keep you well. And, making sure we have time for exercise and seeing our friends is actually going to help us to study more efficiently, because we feel like we have permission to do those things, and permission to study when we're studying, and permission to rest when we're resting.
Yeah, so I guess it's, about prioritizing. There's some things that you'll probably drop so you can fit in study, and there's some things that you should really retain.
It's like your non-negotiables, basically. Yeah. So setting reasonable expectations about how much study you can fit in is sort of the number one thing to do. And then developing a schedule. So maybe Mondays from 9 till 11, I'm going to study this topic. And I've got on the slide there an example of how you can sort of break down your study even further. So on the left, there's got a column that says the topic area that you want to study. So say, for example, you're studying anatomy. You might break it down into anatomy of the neck, anatomy of the back, anatomy of the head, whatever the topic areas are in that course. And then you're going to rate your level of understanding of that topic. So it may be that you were just, switched on the day that they taught anatomy of the neck, and you actually got a lot more understanding of that than the other topics. So you might rate that as a 7. But the day that they were studying the anatomy of the foot, you kind of fell asleep in the lecture and you weren't really concentrating. So you might rate that as a 2. So I guess by rating them, that means you can then prioritize what you're going to study first. Instead of studying in order, we might study by the things that you least understand. And then you can tick off as you've done each of those areas, and then you can re-rate your new level of understanding. And if you have time, go back to the things that you need to study again.
I really like that because it's got like, a goal. If you want to get to this destination, you have to know where you are first. And that's really good.
Yeah, I mean, there's tons of different ways of breaking down study. I literally got this from a Tumblr account of a student. So, I mean, if you look up study breakdown, this, people have been studying for ages. So there's heaps of resources out there if this one doesn't particularly work for you. But that's just an example. And so another example of how you can sort of break down your study. So say, for example, like I said, we might be studying from 9 till 11.
Mm-hmm.
That might seem like a really big amount of time.
Yeah.
And you might start to feel overwhelmed with, I don't want to study for 2 hours. So another technique that you can use is called the Pomodoro Technique. So basically that breaks down your study into 4 cycles of 25 minutes. And then you have a 5-minute break between each 25-minute cycle. And then at the end of that, 4 cycles, you can have a larger break, so 15, 30 minutes, whatever fits in with your study schedule. And you can see by putting in these techniques, we've gone from I'm going to study today to I'm going to study geography, these 5 topics, in 4 25-minute cycles, and I'm going to tick them off as I do them. Mm-hmm. So it's much more specific. You get that sense of achievement when you've ticked them off, and you know exactly what you're going to be doing in that time.
Yeah, I think I used the Pomodoro Technique. I know I did use the Pomodoro Technique when I was studying a lot. I didn't use a timer. I used like a playlist from Spotify that went for about 25 minutes, and that I always used that playlist to study, and at the end of that playlist, I knew I could have a break.
Yeah.
And I really appreciated that kind of short, sharp, intense concentration periods.
Yeah, and so if anybody is interested in using that technique, you can basically put that into Google and find some resources which will explain it a little bit more, but you can also look it up in the App Store, and they have heaps of different apps of how you can kind of set reminders that'll ding at certain times and that type of thing.
Okay. So, Georgie, what about, if I'm really, really stressed, if I'm really anxious, that anticipating anxiety that I have leading up to the exam? Can you say a little bit more about that?
Yeah, so because we've talked about the, sort of the practical strategies, but I guess now we're going to move into what about, I've implemented these strategies, but I'm still feeling really stressed, and I'm noticing that I'm having like some negative thoughts coming up to this exam, which is really common. And so what we're going to do now is just break down, the types of thoughts that people might have. And this can be related to anything that you're feeling anxious or nervous about, but today we'll obviously relate it to exams. So there's sort of 3 categories that you might find, not always within those 3 categories, but commonly within those categories when we're nervous about something. We might start to overestimate how likely something is to occur.
Oh, okay.
So for exams, it might be that we're overestimating how likely it is that we're going to fail. So we might say, I'm definitely going to fail. Like, Noel, if I sit that exam, I'm going to fail.
You're right.
Another thing we might do is we might overestimate how bad the perceived threat will be. So instead of, I'm going to go badly, or I might not get as good a mark as I think I'm going to get, we might say our thoughts might be things like, I'm going to fail, and if I fail, I'm going to have to drop out of university, or, we can start to sort of catastrophize.
Home, live with my parents, be single. Oh no!
Yeah. Which sort of leads directly into the third one, which is we often underestimate our ability to cope. So, if we do go badly in an exam, we might, like I said, we might kind of say, I'm not going to be able to cope with that. But in all likelihood, you're not going to be the first person that's done badly in an exam. And actually, you probably have a lot more coping skills than you thought you would have. So, so that's like another sort of style, is we might sort of think that we can't cope with it, but in actual fact, we can cope with it.
So, Georgie, are you suggesting that when we're really, really stressed and we have, anxious, negative thoughts leading up to exams, we're actually not thinking rationally?
Definitely. I think we're all prone to having irrational thoughts at times, but definitely when we're stressed, those sort of more irrational thoughts can can come up for us.
Yeah. And so I like what you've kind of said, because it stops you from getting carried away with those thoughts and that anxiety, so you can kind of stop, reflect, and kind of recalibrate.
And sometimes even just by knowing that actually I can see that my thoughts are following this type of pattern is enough for us to be like, okay, I can see that right now I'm overestimating, how likely this is going to happen.
Yeah.
So on this slide, we've just got some more examples of negative thoughts that might come up. And like I said, not every thought's going to fit into those categories, but it might be things like I'm going to fail, or I don't know anything. That type of thing.
Okay. Yeah.
So what do we do?
So Georgie, what do you do? What do you do with those thoughts?
And there's so many strategies to manage unhelpful thoughts, and I think if you are noticing that it's really becoming a problem, it's probably a good idea to come and talk to someone at our service. But Noelle and I are just going to run through a couple of different strategies, but like I said, there's lots of different strategies for managing unhelpful thinking. I think one of them is going back to what I said at the very start, which is making sure that you're setting reasonable expectations. Because often if we set expectations that are too high for us, we'll start to have those negative thoughts about not reaching that expectation. So I'm not studying enough, or I'm not doing enough, therefore I'm going to fail. But if we sort of, I guess, link back into those practical strategies of setting that reasonable expectation, then it's less likely that those thoughts are going to come up, because we're going to be setting expectations that we can meet. I guess the other thing is sort of just recognizing when you're having those type of thoughts, and give yourself a little bit of self-love, and try and reframe them in a more sort of I guess like positive or caring way. So something you might want to think about is, because sometimes it's sort of hard to challenge those thoughts, is to think about, what would I tell my friend, or what would I tell my child if they were kind of coming to me and saying that they were having these thoughts? And it might be things like, I don't actually have to know everything, it'll get 100%. I just have to get enough to pass. Or you might be sitting in the exam, and you might say to yourself, I'm just going to attempt the questions that I know, and then come back to the other ones if I have time. So those sort of I guess realistic expectations and thoughts that I guess are showing a bit more self-compassion towards yourself.
So if I've got a thought like, I don't know this information, I'm going to fail the exam, another thought, a compassionate thought that says something like, I might not know this information now, but I have the potential to learn, or I have the capacity to learn.
Yeah.
That kind of thoughts?
Yeah, and even, giving yourself permission to not do well. Like, if you don't do well, that's okay.
Yeah.
You will figure out a way to redo that course, or potentially redo that exam, or I guess that just shows that you don't know the information yet, but there's still opportunities for you to learn that, because that's why you're here at university.
I like that, because it kind of, challenges that fear of failure, that, if I fail, that's the end of the world. Yeah. So we've talked about stress, how, it's not a bad thing, it's not a good thing, it's a useful thing. We've talked about, how it might show up in our body, in our minds, in our behaviors, in our thoughts. We've talked about study styles, and how do you study best, and how to make the best use of your time. I'm just going to cover a couple of practical skills, and one of the useful practical skills to manage stress and anxiety in our body is a practice called mindfulness. And mindfulness has a long history in Eastern traditions, and it's kind of found its way into psychology, and it's a fancy way of saying being present in the moment. Yeah. So how can you do your exam with all that worries of, am I going to pass this exam? What's going to happen next year? What am I going to do? What am I going to do after the exam? Does my friend like me? And can I afford a car? And where am I going to go for holiday? And all that kind of stuff. How can I not get carried away with those thoughts? But how can I be present with whatever I want to do? So if you imagine all those thoughts kind of like a cloud, and all different clouds, soft clouds and big stormy clouds, how can you be the sky and let those clouds pass by? Or how can you be the river and all those thoughts being like leaves floating down the river? So how can you kind of keep your zen? And so mindfulness is this quality of being present. So when a worrying thought comes in, how can you center yourself and let it go out? One way that people do that is by grounding yourself. And, something that we always have around us is our body and our breath. So you can ground yourself with a soothing breath. And if you're uncomfortable with doing that, if you're not sure how to do that, I encourage you maybe to practice by yourself. Maybe when you're lying down in bed, put one hand on your chest, one hand on your stomach, and as you breathe in, feel your stomach expand, and then your chest will slightly expand. As you breathe out, the stomach will go down and the chest will go down. A little bit of a challenge, yeah? Try to count to, maybe to a count of 4. So 1, 2, 3, 4. As you breathe in, hold it. 1, 2, 3, 4. Breathe out. 1, 2, 3, 4. So really just center yourself. If you struggle doing that, maybe you're stressed, maybe you're distracted, you might want to start with taking a deep sigh or deep breath out. Other tips, other mindfulness tips.
I guess one of the things that I think of when I think of mindfulness is something I learned in a training once that said, you don't learn to swim when you're drowning. So mindfulness can be a challenging practice to learn mindfulness in the heat of your stress or in the middle of an exam. It's something that I think it takes a bit of practice to get used to because it can be a really unfamiliar feeling. So I think my biggest tip would be to start practicing early. So I think mindfulness, there's no good time to start because I think it can be helpful in so many areas that you should start right now. But if you're kind of doing it as a strategy for the exams, think about it 2 weeks before and start practicing 2 weeks before. And you can use the good thing is, like, if it is something you're unfamiliar with, there's heaps of apps out there that you can use that will talk you through a mindfulness activity. So Smiling Mind, Headspace, both have really good apps that will sort of talk you through an activity, and you don't have to prioritize a huge amount of time. So it might be, I think for some of them it might be like a 10-minute mindfulness practice on something that can actually make a really big difference on your performance.
So I guess mindfulness is an exercise, a technique to kind of train your mind and attention to be still on one point, whether if it's breathing or studying or doing the exam, instead of kind of wandering around and doing its own thing. It's a way of focusing and taming your own mind. And I think it takes a little bit of practice to do.
I think that the example that you gave at the start about the Olympic athlete, so you was talking about having a split concentration and people being distracted by the crowd or their Nike sponsorship or whatever. A lot of elite athletes will practice mindfulness because it means that they're able to concentrate on their body and what they're doing in that moment. And it does have a really positive correlation with performance.
So what tends to happen is when we're kind of living our life at university, we've got a fair few things that keep us well. We've got family, we've got friends, we've got gaming and exercising and chilling out and all that kind of stuff, and that kind of tends to keep us well. And then we have stress and normal uni stress and keeping up with assignments and doing lectures and doing tutorials, and that normally there's a balance there. But around exam time, our stress becomes a little bit more, and usually what happens is people kind of panic, people kind of get anxious, and they go, I got no time for friends, I got no time for the gym, I got no time for, playing the guitar, and they stop doing those things, and the stress actually gets heavier. The life kind of goes out of balance. And what I'd like to suggest is to maintain, this is a really important time to maintain all those things that keep you well. Probably focus a little bit more on that. So I've got this little analogy of the bucket. So I imagine myself as a bucket, my body's a bucket, and I like to just kind of reflect on, where is my energy level? Where is my motivation right now? Is it 100%? Is it 80%, 50, 30, a little bit low? Where is my energy levels right now with study, with uni? And so I like it to be around 80. 80 and more is great. I can play with 50, but I get really worried when it's down to 30. And so, studying for uni, studying for exams kind of drains that energy, doesn't it? It drains that motivation. It kind of burns you out. So it's really, really important to kind of keep on topping up that bucket. So I like to imagine there's a little tap there, there's a little hose, and think about the things that kind of top up your bucket. Is it good natural sleep? Not too much, not too little. Is it good healthy food? Maybe it's a little recreation time. Is it a little bit of gaming? Is it a little bit of sport? I think it's really important to keep up with good human contact, good connection with friends, family, and people that really nourish you. And that kind of fills my bucket. And so study will kind of, empty out my energy, and I kind of keep on topping it up. And that's kind of like a perpetual race, isn't it? And sometimes, no matter how fast you top it up, your bucket just gets empty and empty and empty. Mm-hmm. Yeah? Does that ever happen to you?
Yeah, I mean, I think that sometimes what happens for me is that I think that there might be like sneaky things that I think that are things that top up my bucket, like watching Netflix. I might be like, oh, I feel really relaxed when I watch Netflix, but actually it's not, at the end of it, I don't feel rejuvenated, I don't feel more motivated, I feel lethargic. Yeah. So I think when I actually have to plan the things that I know do top me up. So it might be things like yoga. So if I'm sort of choosing the sneaky things that I pretend and kind of try and trick myself into thinking top me up, then that's when I find that my bucket's getting low. But if I'm really making sure that I'm doing the things that I know rejuvenate me, then that's how I can cope.
So I think that's really important to remember, to kind of really know yourself. So there are those quick fix feel goods, and that releases dopamine in our brain. That releases, that kind of feel-good experience. But dopamine has a very short half-life. It's a very quick-acting neurochemical, so it disappears really quickly. Yeah, as opposed to, say, oxytocin, where that's released when you have a good conversation with a friend. Maybe you chill out and dinner, maybe you kind of, do a workout together. That kind of bonding experience, that kind of fills up your bucket, and it's more of a long-term chemical that lasts in your system. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Finally, I'd just like you to be aware of what kind of leaks out your energy. Yes, study is going to be one of them. Yeah, but is it your commitment at sports? Is it your commitments with your club or society? Is it your commitments with work? And exam time is a good time to kind of get your partner or your friends or your family around and saying, okay, I'm going to be really stressed for the next 2 weeks. I'm going to really need your help with, I don't know, just cooking and cleaning, and come on, housemates, let's kind of get together. Maybe it's also a good time to kind of take a step back from being the president from the indoor soccer club. Maybe this is a good time, not to say yes to extra shifts at work. So this is usually a good time to kind of limit all those holes that you have at the bottom of your bucket, so you can kind of keep kind of topped up.
Yeah, it's like accommodating for the fact that that the exams are going to be a big hole. So patching up some of the other ones that you might have. Yeah. That usually you can maintain.
Yeah, and if you choose not to hang out with kind of toxic friends or irritable people, hey, this is a good time to do it. So during exams,
I know you have some good strategies that you use during the exams.
So during the exams, I imagine that I leave my worries outside of the door. I don't know if they do it these days. I mean, before, when I used to do exams, you actually had to leave your bag outside the door of the hall. And I used to imagine all my worries kind of being in that bag. Worries about money and girlfriends and holidays and passing. I used to leave that outside my door and kind of get into like a bubble, like a frame of mind there. When I get into the exams, it's a really stressful time, isn't it? Sitting down and watching kind of everyone sit down. Mm-hmm. So that's the time where I connect with my breathing. I really slow myself down. I might do what's called a progressive muscle relaxation, like a physical grounding. So I might sit up in my chair and work my way from maybe my toes up to my body, and I might focus on my legs. And as I breathe in, I might choose to kind of slowly tense and clench that part of the body. Maybe it's my legs right now, and I breathe in, same to a count of 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. And when I breathe out, I really savor that experience of letting go. I might even say to myself, let go, relax, it's okay. And I might work my way up. I'll definitely do my back, I'll do my arms, I'll do my face, I'll do my shoulders. Sometimes I might feel a bit self-conscious, but then I think, look, everyone's really preoccupied about themselves in exams, so I kind of leave that be.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think those are all really good strategies.
Yeah.
And they don't take a lot of time, so it's something you can do while people are getting ready.
Yeah. And what Georgie said before, if you practice this maybe before you go to bed, that's really helpful. Maybe you might practice some form of centering or grounding exercise before you study. So it just becomes muscle memory. It just becomes natural when you get into the exams. Mm-hmm. So Georgie, do you have any tips after the exams?
Well, our most important tip, I think, after exams is often, sometimes we are so wrapped up in trying to study for the exam and get through it that we forget at the end to actually recognize that we just did that and to have a mini celebration. So I think we think it's really important to figure out a way to do something nice for yourself. It can be something really simple. We have an example of something that we thought something as simple as popping some party poppers just to give yourself a symbol and give yourself a pat on the back to say, I just got through that.
Yeah, absolutely. Particularly if you have multiple exams back to back. Having just a little celebration, having a little pause where you kind of go home, have a shower, have a nap, maybe do something relaxing is really, really important before you get stuck into studying.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yep. What else do you think is important after the exam? Are you somebody that talks to other people after you leave the exam room? Do you think that's helpful?
I think for me personally, I sometimes do ask people what they put for question 7 because it's bugging me. And once I know, what that answer is, I can kind of let it go. What about you? Do you ask people?
I always found that, what happened in the exam, this is not something that I have control over anymore. So if I find out that I wrote the wrong answer, that it's not necessarily going to make me feel good about it. So it's actually more helpful for me to just, focus on my celebration and focus on what's coming next and kind of, I guess, put my thoughts back into what had just happened in the exam because there was nothing I could do about that anymore.
So that's a really, really good point. So some people, it's okay to ask, and other people, it might not be great. As a general tip, try to change your conversations after exams from, how do you think you went to what are you going to do nice tonight? What are you looking forward to after all these exams are finished?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I mean, I think just sort of the basic things, you go into an exam and you feel tired afterwards usually. Yeah. It's mentally draining. So just making sure that you get a good night's sleep and have something good to eat afterwards. I think just the essential things that probably most people already are doing.
Yeah. Cool.
So
what to do if things don't go to plan? If you can't attend the exam for whatever reason, maybe you get sick, maybe you have a little car accident, maybe, I don't know, you have to take care of someone. As soon as you have decided that you can't make it to the exam, please email your lecturer or course coordinator saying that you can't make it to the exam, and they'll probably encourage you to get some supporting documentation, maybe from a doctor or a pharmacist or someone like us, a wellbeing advisor, so that we can reschedule the exams to a different time.
And if if you're in the exam and you sort of, you thought, I can do this, I'm not feeling too bad, and then you get into the exam and you think, I'm actually feeling a lot worse than I thought, or, you just have unmanageable anxiety or something like that, that means that you really feel that you're unfit to continue. Just make sure that you let the whoever's running the exam know.
Yeah, the moderators.
The room, and then the same as what you would do if you couldn't make it. You put in an adverse circumstance, and then get the supporting documentation that you need.
Yeah, yeah. Those people that walk around flagging down, say, I can't do the exam, they'll sign you off saying that you're there but you didn't complete the exam. Come see us or go see a doctor for a certificate, and we'll reschedule the exam for another time. Yeah. I think that's everything.
Yeah. That's
So,
pretty much
any
it.
take-home messages, Georgie?
I think take-home messages would be kind to yourself. It's a really stressful time, so, make sure your expectations are reasonable, and just try and make sure you're doing nice things and implementing things that make you feel good into your routine, and just on the inside with your thoughts as well, just being nice to yourself.
Yeah. I think, just remember your strengths, that this isn't the first exam that you've done. You've done many, many exams to this point, and you've survived, and you'll be okay. So good luck.
Thanks.
Bye.